Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Ben, and today I have for you my top 10 most disappointing books of 2022. Now, I've read 99 books this year, and I've given the vast majority of them 5 or 4 stars. So, I've really liked most of what I've read this year, but the ones that I've disliked, I have seriously despised or just been bored by when I was expecting something more. So these books have been truly extremely disappointing to me and make up about the bottom 10% of my reading year. And one reason it's so disappointing for me when I am not engaged in a book is that it's pretty easy for an author to keep me engaged most of the time or to get me invested. I love reading just for the fun of it, getting immersed in the world and characters and empathizing with new characters. And yeah, something has gone wrong if that has not happened. And I have so many TBR books to get through that I feel that opportunity cost really acutely if I slog through a whole book that doesn't provide much payoff. And I also am kind of OCD about completing things, and so I don't DNF many books. I want to be certain that a book has no payoffs for me, or that my initial negative feelings about a book, don't get turned around by the middle or ending. So I have slogged through all the pages of these books. A lot of them were not worth it, but I am confident now that it was the case and I didn't make a poor decision by DNFing or going off incomplete information. And so we'll count backward down from 10, where I have to dip in some of my 3-star reads, and then towards the number 1 worst read of the year for me. So let's start with number 10. That is Abaddon's Gate, Book 3 of The Expanse by Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank, James S.A. Corey. So I loved books 1 and 2 of The Expanse. They were both easy 5-star reads for me. I was really invested and gripped to the page throughout those books. Book 1, we had just 2 alternating POVs, and I really loved the different voices and style that book had every other chapter, and the plotting was really suspenseful. Same thing with book 2, except we had more POVs. Loved meeting Bobby and Avasarala on the page. And the plotting, even though I'd seen the first few seasons of the show years ago, my memory for a lot of the details was gone. And so the plotting was really suspenseful. And I was hopeful that 5-star train would just be continuing. But then we got to book 3, and we had 4 POVs, 3 of them new, and just was not a big fan of them. So Bull and Anna, they were okay. I was kind of indifferent towards those POVs. But Melba was one of the least satisfying POVs I've ever read. It's this almost caricature of a villain from the very beginning. She's planning absolutely horrible things. And the motivations for this character are really underdeveloped and weak and not really believable. And then this character's arc, based on where they start, also doesn't make sense. It just was a big wet blanket on my whole enjoyment of this book, and I was just keeping on hoping to return to Holden's POV, and I just wanted to get back to him throughout this book. And so it was still engaging. The overall plotting and where it's moving the series was important, but yeah, the POVs here were where things fell flat in the antagonist. But luckily, Expanse 4 and 5 returned to form, and I really loved those last 2 books, and so overall I'm very happy with the Expanse series, but I was really hoping this one would be consistent, kind of 4 or 5 stars. But yeah, this one did not work too well. For number 9, it would be The King Beyond the Gate by David Gemmell. So this is book 2 by publication order in the Draenei saga, and also the second book that David Gemmell ever wrote. So I started Gemmell this year with Legend, his first ever book, and I don't know that going by pub order with David Gemmell is really wise or makes sense. The chronology of the Draenei series jumps all over the place. And I liked Legend a lot. But the beginning was a little clunky with the setup. And it's a debut book by an author around like 1980. And this one I think came out in 1985. And I read in the afterword about the kind of saga he went through in getting this written. The publisher was not happy with the actual second book he wrote. And they wanted him to do more of a sequel to Legend and for it to be a very similar book to Legend because it was a big surprise success commercially for the publisher. And so they kind of forced him into writing this sequel to Legend. It takes place 100 years after, and it feels like it's rehashing a lot of the same kind of character tropes and plot points, but it's all done worse than in Legend, and in a less interesting way. And the characters I never really could get into. Unlike with Legend, there was this old warrior Druss coming out of retirement who was just really engaging to be with. And there was lots of interesting philosophizing going on here and there in Legend. I found a lot of that to be missing from this book. And so I think overall this book was a misfire. Other people who are big Gemmell fans say this is towards the bottom with Gemmell's works. And I really want to read some of the ones that they rate higher, whether that's some of his later published works in the 90s and 2000s, the Troy trilogy or the Regante series. And I want to keep going in Draenei because there's different sub-series within that seem like they could be interesting. But this book too, I think easily one people can avoid and not miss much. Okay, my number 8 and 7 most disappointing books of the year are going to come from the same series. That is book 2 of Cradle, Soulsmith, and book 4 of Cradle, Skysworn. So I went through all the Cradle books this year, and I didn't really know what to expect. I never watched shonen anime. I never read any progression fantasy before. And book 1 went pretty well. I enjoyed my time with it. I thought it set up something possibly very interesting. And then book 2 was just a complete bore for me. In progression fantasy, the characters start out not very powerful, and then they gradually increase in power and abilities and get to a point where they can just rain down destruction upon their enemies and have a lot of fun against really powerful beings. But in this early stage of the Cradle saga, Lyndon, the main character, is not powerful, and this has to get him to a point where he's just starting to gain some power and abilities, because he starts out really, really weak. And the things that happened in this book were just not interesting. The political factions at play were not set up very well, and later on we look back and realize that what's going on in this book are just really, really tiny fish fighting in the midst of this pond where there's giant sharks and whales kind of going at it. And so this is just a book where also we haven't met all the main characters that form kind of Lyndon's team yet, that are the heart of the series, really in the second half of the series. And a fan favorite character just gets introduced briefly in this one. And there's a lot of things that really, a lot of fans of the series said it's their least favorite book. And so I was kind of expecting it, but it's still a big bore and a step down for me from book 1. But book 3 was actually a step up. I thought, okay, this is progressing. I'm getting more of a handle on the world building and the overarching plot, and Lyndon, the main character, is increasing in skill and abilities and with sidekicks and things. And things felt like they were starting to build up and that I was approaching a point where the series would take off. And then book 4 happened, Skysworn, and it just came back down to the level of where I was at with book 2, where I was just not enjoying my time with it. There were big action sequences that were supposed to be very high stakes and climactic, and they just completely fell flat for me. Things in the beginning of the series just weren't set up very well for me to care, whether it's on the character front and not being invested in the characters, or just a lot of the bigger plot kind of aspects that were supposed to create high stakes weren't set up very well. So on a first read, these giant action sequences are happening, and I have no context for them and don't understand the power of all the people involved. And I also just, the stakes felt very low for the main character because, I know it's a long-running series, and I know that somehow he's going to pull out of these sticky situations. And in this early going, it didn't seem like there was a lot of problem solving and competence of the main character that was leading to him pulling out of these situations. And so it was kind of just an uninteresting kind of ride in the beginning of this series. Luckily, though, things started to turn around in book 6 for me. When things started slowing down, I started becoming more attached to the characters. The factions, all the different factions involved started becoming more clear. And then I started to actually care about the action scenes. But I know if I go back and reread, I'll like these books more because I'll have that extra context, and I'll be able to maybe appreciate the lower power level of the characters early on. But as a first read, just these early books really heavily disappointing and unengaging. And if I didn't have Travis Baldry's great lively audiobook narration, I probably would have DNF'd the series maybe after book 2, but he at least was providing fun narration. And luckily, finally in book 6, I felt like the story was rising to the quality of Baldry's narration, and I was really enjoying myself at that point. So, yeah, if the early books in Cradle are not working for you too well, maybe stick with it. They're really short, quick books, especially in this first half. And so if you get through to 5 or past 5, and you're still kind of semi-enjoying it, you might find that the second half of the series is a very different animal. All right, my 6th most disappointing book was Sharpe's Fury. That's number 11 in the long-running Sharpe series, at 22 now. But I have given most of these Sharpe books 5 stars or 4 stars. A lot of 5 stars in this series. So it's one of my favorite series, and it's become just a real joy. But this one did not have really any of the aspects that make the other books so engaging for me. And I just come to rely on this series to provide fast-paced, fun, tense, engaging reads. And this one just did not deliver any of that. It's a very skippable in the Sharpe series. It's kind of just a mostly fictionalized adventure. And Cornwell actually did not plan to write this book. This is one of the last ones he published, and it's the last one he published in the 2000s, right before he started publishing all of the Last Kingdom books. And he writes in the afterword that some acquaintance at a wedding party he was at just kept on bothering him about the city of Cadiz, and that he had to write about Cadiz. And for some reason, Cornwell listened to him. Cornwell never visited that city, unlike every other location that we went to in the other books, whether it's in India or Portugal or Spain. And there wasn't an important battle that took place there. And so a lot of this book just had a fictionalized plot that was not very interesting, a villain that was veered too far into caricature, when most of the other villains either in this series make your blood boil, or they're kind of exaggerated to the point where they provide a lot of humor. Did not get that from this antagonist. The plotting was a little too breezy and lacking stakes and just interesting kind of suspense plotting. And then the battle at the end is one where Sharpe's company was not near this location, so Sharpe is kind of just there randomly because of his fictional mission, and he's just observing it, so he's not even taking part in this battle at the end. And that really hurt the drama of the battle scenes, and usually the Sharpe battle sequences are so tense and immersive. And then also, Cornwell, you could tell he didn't plan to write this, because he took a real factual plot point from the end of this battle near Cadiz, and he had put it inside Sharpe's Eagle. But then when he wrote this one, he included this climactic part of the battle, and it just felt repetitive from what we already read from Sharpe's Eagle. And so lots of things contributed to this being just a big flop in the Sharpe series. And unless you're completing the whole thing like I am, this one easy to skip, because it truly a standalone, mostly fictionalized little adventure that you don't need. But most of these Sharpe books have been so high quality, and just disappointing that this one wouldn't continue that role that Cornwell was on for me. All right, we have come finally to my top 5 most disappointing books of the year, to the 1-star reads. These are the ones that provided almost no payoff, no enjoyment, that I had to slog through to the end, hoping that somewhere along the way they would pick up for me or I would start to care. And that never happened with any of these, unfortunately. Now, my number 5 most disappointing was Blood and Bone by Ian C. Esselmont. That's book 5 out of 6 of the novels of the Malazan Empire. Now, this series was a roller coaster ride for me up to this point. I really loved the short, more focused first book, Knight of Knives. And then book 2 was one of my most disappointing books of last year. That's Return of the Crimson Guard. Felt like Esselmont was trying to do the multi-POV epic like Erickson, but not doing it nearly as well. And then I liked Stonewielder much more, and then really loved Orb Scepter Throne, which is just a kind of direct sequel to Toll the Hounds, and is a smaller number of POVs and more focused. And so I was really liking Esselmont, and I thought this series could really end strong for me and maybe make up for some of the books that I didn't love. And then this book just destroyed me. It's huge. It's very small print. and it takes place on this island that's mostly made up of jungle. And it does do the atmosphere and the jungle setting really well and immersively. I just didn't care that much about that aspect of the book and about the atmosphere and tone. And it's really not about caring about these different characters. There's a lot of POVs. It jumps around continuously, so I can never get momentum with one storyline and plotline. It just kept on jumping too soon away from each POV. And this is almost the point of it is that there aren't really cathartic, resolved plot lines and arcs for everyone. It's just a lot of people pointlessly kind of getting into violent episodes or running around the jungle, not really doing anything or knowing where they're going. And that is an interesting kind of theme, but it just led to not being very engaged with what was happening. So this one, yeah, just not my kind of book, although I could see there are a lot of really cool aspects to it that I know people have enjoyed much more than me. So I can see the merit, at least, in this one. The next one, the fourth most disappointing book, is also an Ian C. Esmond. That's A Sail. So that is book 6. This is the closing finale of the series, Novels of the Milesian Empire. And if I had trouble getting attached to characters and plot lines in Blood and Bone, this one did even worse on that front. Esmond kind of went out of his way, I think, in this book to be at a very far removed psychic distance from the POV characters. So we don't get a lot of internal character reflections. Almost everything in this book is just purely kind of description of what characters are seeing happen around them in a more kind of objective way than usual, and dialogue. And we just have all these different POVs and new POVs and characters and situations that we don't have a lot of context for, which is very similar to how Erikson does the main Milesian Book of the Fallen books. Except Esselmont doesn't make up for that with very engaging other elements. So when I get thrown into situations I don't really understand the background of or people's motivations in Erikson's books, there's often really insane, awesome events that are happening, or there's really lively, personality-filled dialogue and really distinctive characters who are just making their personalities known in that moment. But we don't really have that in this book. It's a lot of people and situations that I have no clue why they're doing what they're doing. They're running around a mountainside. And as an ending for the series, with the whole Crimson Guard arc of this series, it was really just the opposite of climactic and cathartic. Did not provide much of a payoff at all. I was utterly bored and uninterested in this, and I think I am still hopeful, though, that the Path to Ascendancy books are going to be a return to what I like from Esselmont when he tells slimmer, more focused stories with fewer POVs, and I think that's where Esselmont shines, not in these Eriksonian large epics where I feel like he's trying to be Erikson when that's not where his strengths lie. So yeah, those two books were huge, huge disappointments and took forever to get through. But glad that I can bring closure to that series finally, and I'll probably never return. All right, number 3 is The Death of Dulgath by Michael J. Sullivan. That is the third book in the Rhaenyra Chronicles series, the Royce and Hadrian prequel novels that happen before Rhaenyra Revelations. So that 6-book series was a big hit with me. Swashbuckling fun. It's kind of pretty standard adventure fantasy, but I like the characters. I thought there was a lot of payoff at the end of that series. And so I was hoping that the Chronicles were going to be fun palate cleansers for me, where we go back to really important defining moments in Royce and Hadrian's kind of relationship and jobs that they'd done in the past, and they would have high stakes and we'd get more of that swashbuckling fun. And we got some of that in the first 2 books of this series, but it completely went off the rails here with this one. This one feels like they went to this remote location for a job where they're protecting a princess who's in danger, and there's just no reason for this book to exist in terms of the longer arc of the series. It's just a completely standalone, almost detective style novel where almost nothing happens on a character front or a plot front. And so it's just spending time with Royce and Hadrian on an unimportant job. And it was so boring. Oh my goodness. This beautiful cover by, I believe, Mark Simonetti, it kind of actually is perfect for this book, where there's just this castle by the coast and nothing is happening there. I started and stopped this book twice because I was so bored by the beginning, but I should have taken that as a sign. But I powered through eventually, and it was so bad. There's only one candidate in this castle setting for who the dangerous, mysterious villain is, and it's the one guy that is obviously outwardly evil and a complete jerk to everyone around him, and who would benefit a lot if the princess were killed. But no one in the story is calling that out, and there is no big plot twist because there's no other candidate for who the bad guy is. The mystery plot was just absolutely broken in this book. And yeah, I am worried about the next book in this series, The Disappearance of Winter's Daughter. It seems like that's going to be in the similar vein to this one. And I might skip it. I'm hoping that the next one, I think, is Drumendor, might be a return to the swashbuckling fun of what I was hoping this series would be. But this book kind of sapped all of my Rhaenyra enjoyment out of me and my enthusiasm for continuing in the series. And don't know if I'm ever going to pick up another Sullivan book again, because he's been so disappointing after finishing the Revelations. Yeah, not what I want. My number 2 most disappointing book is The First Binding by R.R. Virdi. I talked about this one at length in a recent video about the 2022 new releases. And yeah, this one was a failure on all levels. I pre-ordered it. I had seen an interview done with the author, with Petrick, that he seems like a really cool guy. But being a cool, inspirational person doesn't make you a great writer, nor does it mean that I will personally enjoy your book, like I might have thought. Now, this just didn't offer anything that made me like it. You're with one character telling his life story from a kind of middle-aged present moment. The plotting in the present day is intentionally left very mysterious, and it is pretty ridiculous and was not intriguing at all. And then this backstory that we get about Ari growing up also just didn't feel suspenseful or interesting. We know that Ari in the present day can do magic, and so it's established in this world that there is one place, the ashram, this magic school, where people learn magic. So I know from the very beginning that he's eventually going to end up at this magic school. And it just took forever to get there. And these episodes that happened leading up to that were just completely uninteresting to me. And I later learned why this was, I think, which is because Verdi set it up that the backstory flashbacks would basically be episodic and show you how Ari obtained each part of his kind of legend that he has in the present day, whether it's the King of Sparrows or Killer of Demons. And each individual episode was not plotted in an interesting way and ended up very predictably, felt cliched in a lot of ways. And yeah, on a plot front, it offered very little. I really did not grow attached to the main character or any of the side characters. They mostly felt like cardboard cutouts. And there's a lot of philosophizing in here that also felt completely flat. I was just utterly disappointed by this entire thing when I had such high hopes for it being a new fantasy series. I could get in early on the ground floor and follow as new books came out, and a new author I could hold up as one of my favorites. I was just hopeful for this, but was not to be with this one. And I know people like it, so this might just not be the kind of story that I'm inclined to like in the first place, a kind of chronicling tale. So yeah, not sure about how other people might feel, but an utter, complete miss in every way for me. Which takes me to my number 1 most disappointing book of 2022, and it actually wasn't close, which is crazy considering how long the first binding was and how little engaged I was by it. And that is Skullsworn by Brian Staveley. So, this is the 4th Staveley book I read. I had read the Chronicle of the Unhewn Throne trilogy earlier before trying this one out, and it was a very mid experience for me, that trilogy. I liked aspects of it. I thought the ending was very weak, but I thought, okay, Petrick loves Skullsworn. He gave it rave reviews, one of his best standalones ever. And I thought, okay, maybe Staley's going to step up his game past the trilogy, and I could see what's going on, and if that was the case. That is not the case. Not only did Staley not step up his game, he fell down into a black hole abyss and completely lost his authorly mind while writing this, because some of the dumbest plot points happen that I've ever read. The by far stupidest ending to a book I've ever seen, and the ideas and the philosophizing that is presented here are just so inane and ridiculous. I just didn't know what I was reading much of the time. So let me lay it out for you what's happening. This is a prequel book where a death cult assassin from the trilogy, who we know, Pier, is shown going through her initiation trial for becoming a real full member of the death cult. And so we know, first of all, that this character is going to survive this. So some of those stakes that the book is kind of hinging on aren't really there. And this takes place all within the context of a death cult that worships death and thinks death is this amazing thing that's nothing to worry about, that's totally fine and ethical to dole out to people and to kill anyone and everyone. And whenever people die, that's just when the god of death is calling your name. And so they don't fear death, and they don't mind giving it out freely. And so it's a pretty whacked out philosophy, and we just get that continually. And let me just give you a little taste of the prose and the philosophizing in here, just to give you a little taste, a little sample from the very beginning of this book. Take a grape. The purple skin is muted, as if by mist or fog. Polish it, or not, then pop it into your mouth. The flesh is firm beneath the cool, smooth skin. If you find yourself becoming aroused, stop. Start your imagining over. The grape is a grape. Imagine it properly, or this will not work. Now, what does the grape taste like? A grape tastes like a grape? Of course not. Until you bite the grape, it has no taste. It might as well be a stone lifted from the cold current of some river in autumn, a smooth, chill orb, reticent, flavorless. You could hold it trapped between your palate and tongue forever, with only the faintest hint of juice at the tiny breach where it was plucked from the stem. You are like that grape, plump with slick, rich sweetness, with wet purple life. The truth of life is the grape's truth. Only when jaws bite down, when the skin splits, when the sun-cold flesh explodes onto the tongue does it matter. Without the moment of its own destruction, the grape is just a smooth, colorful stone. Without the foreknowledge of the woman who holds it in her hand, her anticipation, before it even passes her lips, of the mangled skin and the sweet life draining over the tongue, the grape would hold no savor. So that's taste of the purple prose, you might say, but also of the constant philosophizing you get throughout this book about how death provides all of the meaning of life, that without things' ultimate demise, they wouldn't exist, they wouldn't hold meaning of what they are before that. I highly disagree with this philosophy, but this is the only POV we get. This is the only perspective. There's no challenging of this at all. It's very strange on the ideas front. Now, on the plot front, some funny things happen towards the beginning. Well, first of all, let me set you up with this trial. The trial, Stavely loves his trials that don't make much logical sense, but that also seem to go against the interests of the groups that are trying to initiate new members. A lot of trials that end up killing the initiates. But what happens in this trial is you have to kill 7 people to become a full member. And one of them has to be someone that you love, truly. Now, how does this get judged? Love is an extremely complicated, internal, ever-changing kind of emotion that someone might have for another person. How does that get judged by the other members of the cult? These questions don't get explored, of course, and instead we set off Pier and two members of the cult to this city where she's going to track down a guy that she once had a short fling with, that she wants to kind of try to rekindle some of the relationships so she could fall in love with him so that she could then kill him. And that's the main plot and tension of this book, is that plot, which is pretty ridiculous. And how it ends up playing out is more absurd than you could possibly imagine. Now, they're walking to this city kind of across a 15-mile long walkway that's over a swamp, a marshland. And this has been there for many years, this causeway. And just as the three characters are walking to the city, the part of the walkway where they're at, just this little section of it, ends up breaking off and falling into the swamp where there are deadly crocodiles. Now, it just so happens that, this thing's been there for years and it's 15 miles long, but it just so happens to break at the point where Pier falls in the water, but the two people she was with just happened to be right over the point where it broke and did not fall in. And so they're kind of looking at Pier and laughing and being like, Pier, what are you doing? Come up, come on. And she's struggling to avoid the crocodiles. Crocodiles are eating some of the other people that fell in, and Pier sees a crocodile eating a woman, and she throws her knife and kills this woman to put her out of her misery. And of course, some local people see this, that a woman was getting literally in the mouth, getting eaten by a deadly crocodile, and they then say, "Oh, murderer, what did you do?" And so Pier and her death cult members have to run away from them. It is the dumbest single scene I think I can ever remember reading. And you just get more of that kind of stuff throughout this book. It's so spectacularly bad on so many levels that it approaches the point at which it's amusing. Like really terrible movies like Tommy Wiseau's The Room is so bad that it's kind of enjoyable and good in some ways. And this book approaches that level of bad, but does not provide the kind of, I think, serious, stakes-filled storytelling that Stavely thinks he's providing. I just don't understand how this book came to be, how editors and publishers signed off on it. It does not make sense. And Tor, I no longer trust Tor, by the way, because with their recent epic fantasy authors, whether it's R. Verdi or Brian Stavely, they're just there have to be a lot of better epic fantasy authors trying to get their books published, and for them to have put so much into Stavely and Verdi seems to be very disappointing. So I'm going to be much more careful with Tor's new epic fantasy authors, I think, because whatever they're doing in the choosing stage or the editing stage is not working for me at all. All right, those were my top 10 most disappointing books of the year. Have you read any of those? Do you disagree with some of my takes? I'd love to hear that. Hopefully, I might be warning you away from some of these if you have similar reading taste and align with me. And so you want to slog through those and I can provide a kind of public service. But tell me what you think, and I'll see you later.